from the air age, through the missile age, and into the age of space. Space is a place of knowledge. Strength has become the index to peace.
"1968 was a scary year to be a submariner. It was the deadliest year for the crews of submarines since the end of World War II. That year alone, 4 submarines sank under mysterious circumstances, killing a combined 318 sailors. Even at the present, many of the details of each of these 4 accidents remains murky. The unexplained rash of subsinkings that year began with the Israeli INS Dakar. The boat was originally built for the British Royal Navy in 1943 during World War II as a variant of the British T-class of submarines. Originally christened as the Totem when it launched, the boat was commissioned after the end of the war in 1945, and it served for a number of years in the British Navy and was further upgraded in 1951 and again in 1953. It was sold to Israel along with its other 2 T-class sister boats, the Truncheon and the Turpin, in the mid-1960s after undergoing a large-scale refitment to modernize the sub. The refitment included streamlining the hull and superstructure. The diesel engines were upgraded, and considerable effort was put into noise reduction of every part of the boat. After its refitment at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in England, the sub was recommissioned as the Dakar before undergoing extensive sea trials for most of 1967 in Scotland. Once the Dakar had passed its sea trials, the boat returned to Portsmouth in late 1967 to be turned over to the Israeli Navy. The boat set sail on its maiden voyage on January 9, 1968. Its first port of call would be at Gibraltar on January 15th. On the 16th, the Dakar returned to sea and intended to cross the Mediterranean using a special snorkel system, which allowed diesel submarines to remain under the water for much longer compared to running on battery power alone. The original plan was to arrive at what would be its home port of Haifa on February 2nd. The Dakar was making much better time than they had expected, and the captain of the vessel, Major Renan, radioed into Haifa and requested entry into the port early due to the unexpected speed that they had been able to maintain. On January 24, 1968, the Dakar transmitted her position to Haifa, which was slightly east of Crete and heading towards Haifa. Over the next day, the sub sent 3 more control transmissions, which did not include their position. The last of these was sent at 2:25 a.m. on January 25th. After this, the sub went silent and was never heard from again. The next day, on January 26th, the British Admiralty reported the sub missing. The last known position was given, which was approximately 100 miles west of Cyprus. Shortly thereafter, an international search and rescue operation was begun to locate the missing sub. The Israeli Navy sent out a request that all vessels in the area to be on the lookout for the missing submarine, but it would not give an official missing status for the vessel for unknown reasons. On January 27th, a radio station located on Crete, near Nicosia, began receiving distress calls on the frequency that the Dakar's emergency buoy operated on, but the location was to the southeast of Cyprus. And despite these signals being received, the sub was not located, and the vessel and crew were eventually presumed lost after all non-Israeli search and rescue forces were called off on the evening of January 31st. The Israeli Navy continued the search for the missing sub until February 4th, when they finally called off all their search efforts. Israeli officials denied that the sub sank due to any hostile action and stated that the sub was involved in crash diving exercises when it disappeared and likely sank due to a mechanical failure on the sub. More than a year passed with no sign of the Dakar ever turning up. Then, on February 9th, 1969, a fisherman found the emergency buoy of the Dakar washed up on shore south of Gaza. However, nothing else would come from finding this piece of the sub washed up on shore, and the Dakar would remain missing for another 30 years. In 1970, an Egyptian newspaper reported that the Dakar had been spotted by an Egyptian frigate and attempted to attack the sub. The newspaper claimed that during a training mission on January 24, 1968, that the Egyptian frigate Assault was returning from doing normal training, and on their return trip saw the periscope of a foreign submarine sticking out of the sea in Egyptian waters, approximately 2 miles off the coast of Alexandria. The decision was made to attack the unknown sub. However, the sub hastily went into a dive, and the Egyptian frigate lost track of it. The commander of the Assault speculated that the sub may have crashed into the bottom due to the water depth there being only approximately 35 meters. The Israeli government stated that these claims were false, and there was no evidence to substantiate them. The U.S. intelligence services backed this up by stating that their data, which was gathered extensively in the Mediterranean via sonic buoys and sensors placed on the ocean floor, did not pick up any acoustic events that would imply that the boat had been sunk by a torpedo or any hostile actions. Later, in 1968, the United States and the Soviet Union would both lose submarines loaded with nuclear weapons. These events would unfortunately overshadow the INS Dakar, and the sub was mostly forgotten about. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, there would be revitalized efforts to locate the missing vessel. But even with the improved technology of the later decades, no sign of the sub was ever found. The Dakar's location would remain a mystery until 1999, when a joint U.S.-Israeli search team, which had access to U.S. intelligence reports, finally located a large object on the ocean floor between Crete and Cyprus at approximately 3,000 meters of depth. A remote ROV was sent down to the object to inspect the anomaly, and it was confirmed that the Dakar had actually been located. The sub lay on its keel, and the conning tower was snapped off, and the rear of the sub lay next to the main hull of the submarine. A year later, in October of 2000, another joint team between the Nauticos Corporation and the Israeli Navy went to survey the wreckage of the Dakar. Many artifacts were recovered during this joint mission, including the submarine's bridge, the compass, and many other small items belonging to the crew. The reason for the loss of the sub remains unknown, but from various surveys conducted of the wreckage, it appears that no emergency actions had been undertaken by the crew prior to the boat sinking. The boat appears to have simply dove below its crush depth, suffering a massive hull rupture, and went down without a fuss. The emergency buoy, which washed up on shore 30 years prior near Gaza, was likely released when the hull was imploded by water pressure. The theories as to what happened to the Dakar are varied, but one person who had first-hand knowledge of the sub proposed a theory that was backed up with his own experience. Brian Forbes captained the HMS Totem 2 years before it was sold to Israel, and argues that the T-class submarines had a built-in critical flaw, which resulted in the above-average rate of losses for the class of subs. 50 T-class submarines were constructed and 18 of them sank. Forbes stated that the T-class had a sonar system that had a dead field of vision directly in front of the submarine. He theorized that the boat may have been traveling in a shallow dive, and a passing ship clipped the boat's conning tower, crushing its periscope, induction pipe, and the communications tower. This had actually occurred once before in 1950 to the HMS Truculent in the Thames estuary. Superstitious sailors point out that during the renovations to the vessel at Portsmouth in 1967, the iconic totem pole, which was the sub's icon, had been removed from the conning tower. Many workers at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard at the time expressed concern that it was a bad omen and should be left on, but the decision was made to remove it. If a passing ship did clip the Dakar, crushing its conning tower and dooming the vessel, it would seem to lend credence to the age-old sailor superstitions. The company that assisted the Israeli Navy in discovering the Dakar, Nauticos, said by their inspection of the thousands of high-definition pictures of the wreck, the best guess is that during the rapid dive exercises that Dakar was performing, something occurred in the forward compartment that caused flooding to occur. Because of the speed of the dive during these training exercises, with additional flooding in the nose of the submarine, the sub reached its maximum depth of 300 meters within only 2 minutes of beginning the dive. The excess weight of the floodwater in the nose of the submarine made recovery from this dive impossible. A rapid implosion of the hull occurred almost immediately, tearing the stern of the submarine loose from the rest of the vessel as it sank almost 2 miles to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Whatever occurred on the Dakar that day, we may never know for certain, but in the 6 months that followed, there would be 3 more mysterious disappearances of military submarines, with not many more answers than we have with the Dakar.